Did everybody have a chance to finish up? Okay. Come on in. What we normally do in our trainings is that we would have pairs invite them to volunteer to come up and then reenact what they did. We may do that later. We're not going to do it right now. I'm just being a little sensitive to the time. But it's always kind of a fun thing to see. And one time we did this, and refugees they have a whole different entertainment enjoyment. Because, you don't have TV and whatever else we have in this country. And so, but it was amazing. They really get into it. Like I know one particular illustration, one that played that little boy, the Danny, he was just given his healer the hardest time. The kid would get up and leave and then come back and storm and shout. And it was pretty entertaining, actually. So it's interesting. Okay, what I want to do, because I'm just trying to be a little sensitive to the time, and so the next section I'm going to defer, if we have time, to later this afternoon, because I think it's more important that we move ahead with the second level training. So if you will go to page 21, this is really the start of the level 2 training. I don't know, it doesn't say that. Oh, no, it does in the notes. So go to page 21. I'm not going to go over the trauma checklist. That's just for your benefit. You can do it on your own time. And it's simply a list of symptoms that you can go through, sort of be familiar with. Quite honestly, I don't go through this, but the more experience you have, the more you'll just be familiar with it, so that you have in your own mind that this person is traumatized, how traumatized they might be, so that you can be of most benefit for them. What I want to shift into now, this isn't in your notes, so if you have somewhere free to take notes, go ahead and do it, because this is fairly new, because it's on trauma and memory. Again, your hard tax dollars at work in a good way. There's been quite a bit of research done recently. When I mean recently, in the last probably 5 years or less, on trauma and memory. That's really the research has been on memory in general. Why people remember and why do they remember what they remember. And, from a Christian perspective, this is interesting, because, for us as Christians, it's so important to remember. Jesus says, when we take Holy Communion, do this in remembrance of Him. And of course, we want to remember scriptures. We want to remember our experience that God has given us. So just on a personal level, the research that has emerged just in the last few years, very recent, as I said, about memory and clarification about what memory is and what it isn't is helpful. And there's a smaller segment regarding memory that we're focused on in terms of trauma and memory. So if you want to go ahead and put something at the top of your page, what I would suggest is just put down trauma and memory. I'm sort of fascinated by the brain. I got a big, huge book back in Uganda. It's just on the brain. And really, if you're looking for something to kind of jump into for your own edification and knowledge, you can Google the brain. And I think, there's been so much we know about the brain that we never knew about the brain before. And of course, the brain is what it's all about. I know we have feelings, and if you're like me, I feel my emotions here, and I think that's where they are. Do you ever think that? Oh, my heart, it's my heart. That's what I'm feeling. Oh, my heart. I get that, but it's not. It's in the brain, sending out certain hormones that you feel physically that we call emotions. So when you look at the brain, when it comes to memory, there's the prefrontal cortex here in the front that is responsible for recording memory in our life, the things that happen. And another part of the prefrontal cortex is the amygdala, which records fear. And of course, that has to do with trauma. And so it's not unusual for the brain to process fearful events by simply discarding them. So the person doesn't remember them. That in part has to do with their own survival. It doesn't mean, when I say discard it doesn't mean they've gone away. They're still there. But the brain tends not to retrieve them. When it comes to memory, the brain will retrieve certain things and not retrieve certain things for a number of different reasons that are not always clear. And when we come to thinking about memory, there are what we call implicit memories and explicit memories. So implicit memories are those things that you just kind of know naturally. Whereas explicit memories can either be somatic, what we call somatic, or episodic. So let me kind of review that for you first of all, just as you write it down. So implicit memories are those things you just kind of naturally know, that you kind of learn once and you don't have to learn it again. How many know how to ride a bicycle? And how many haven't ridden a bicycle in years? Okay. Well, you have an implicit memory of riding that bicycle, which means in all likelihood, if you got on a bicycle right now, even though you haven't ridden it in years, you'd know how to ride the bicycle. You getting me? Okay. So that's recorded in our brain, in the front part of our brain, as something that we really don't need to relearn once it's been learned. To some degree, it's like driving. I don't drive in Uganda because they drive on the wrong side of the road. My friends like to remind me, no, we don't drive on the wrong side of the road. You drive on the wrong side of the road. And the reason why I don't drive there is because I know I have implicit memories about driving. You getting me? I get in my car, I drove down here today, and I don't even think about it. And I know that because I've had this experience in the UK and in Australia, if I get in that car, I'm going up the wrong way in the street. And I don't even know it till somebody's honking the horn at me, giving the international sign for I love you. Like, you're an idiot. What are you doing on the wrong side of the street? So that's this implicit memory thing. Now, another kind of memory is, again, explicit memory. And that's divided into somatic memory and into episodic memory. And episodic is going to be the important thing with regards to recording for memory with regards to trauma. Somatic memory is 2 + 2 is 4. It's facts, it's figures, it's information. Western and particularly British education system is built on somatic memories. You with me? That you memorize facts, figures, information, and that kind of thing as evidence of that, you're being educated. Episodic memory is when the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala in particular records significant events in your life. Some sort of episode that has occurred. So it would be like, for example, I used this example once when I was training folks in Uganda, and it was interesting. They were South Sudanese. And I used the example of a wedding. And because for most of your wedding was probably, if you're married, a significant event, like the birth of your child. Are you with me? So that's recorded episodically here. And so I used that. I had a little cultural experience. And I said, how many of you are married? And the majority of them raised their hands. And so I went on like your typical Westerner and trying to explain episodic memory. I said, so you remember your wedding, right? And they looked at me like a deer in the headlights. And it took a gentleman being very nice, because they tend to be shy, saying to me, well, most of us married, but we've not had a wedding. Because in that culture, there's no marriage apart from the bride price. I know this personally, trust me. It doesn't exist. You could be married in a church, you could be married by the state, but if you haven't paid the bride price, as far as the family and the village where that woman came from, you're not married. Because that bride price has, so there's no wedding until the bride price is paid. We have a great guy, Moses, who works for Paracletus. He's been married with his wife, because they would call it, but it's not marriage in their tradition, for about 10 years. They have a couple kids. Loves the Lord, does a great job for us. And it's only just before I left that he has finished paying the bride price. He's been paying on installments, if you will. And so now he's recognized that the two of them, because the village is happy, you're with me, and the family's all happy because the bride price has been paid. So I just used the wrong example as a wedding as an episodic memory. Maybe paying the bride price is more an episodic memory for him than the wedding itself. So, but you got the picture. So when trauma occurs, what the brain will record is that episodic memory of the actual traumatic event, okay? Now, what the brain retrieves is not necessarily an accurate account of the episodic memory. We used to think that the brain was, the memory part of the brain's function was to remember what happened in the past, okay? I remember what happened when I was 10 years old. I remember this event or that event. You with me? Scientists believe now, and I buy into this, and I'll tell you why, that the purpose of memory in the brain is not to remember the past, like a video camera. It's to remember certain aspects of the past that the brain determines is of value to that person for the future. Did you just get that? So something can happen in somebody's past, an episodic memory, something significant. But the brain will only retrieve those incidents from that past event that the brain determines this is going to be helpful for you sometime in the future. You don't have to remember the other stuff, but we're going to remember this. You get me, okay? I like that, because for me, that sounds so much like God. That there are things God probably just doesn't want me to remember. It's just not helpful. Paul says, forgetting the things that lie behind. You know, we look at the goal, the prize, looking forward. And so when it comes to trauma, and you bring somebody through healing and trauma, and they start to tell their trauma story. This is what why I want to take time just to talk about memory. What you want to focus on is the things they remember about that traumatic event. You may even be familiar with it. You may even be familiar with the incident. And you're thinking, well, they're missing certain elements of what actually happened. But again, what I'm suggesting, if the research is correct, is that's because the brain only wants to remember certain aspects of that. It's no value to remember everything that happened to them. It doesn't serve a purpose. However, remembering certain aspects, certain incidences, certain whatever from that traumatic episode is somehow, in the brain's estimation, going to be helpful for them in some way in the future. And as I said, that to me, that I like that because I like to kind of think that, you know, things happen in your life for a reason. I believe that, right? There's a purpose for everything under heaven. Something, it happens for a reason. But I don't remember everything that happened in my life. But I'm wondering if the way God made my memory in my brain was that's okay, Glenn. You don't have to remember everything. Trust me, I will remember the things you need to remember. And when it's time, when it's right, I'll bring that back to your memory. I like when Jesus said to his disciples that when the time comes, I will bring to your remembrance those things which you need to know. And I'm just trying to make connections with the scripture. And I wonder if Jesus was thinking, okay, I'm telling you a lot of stuff, right? And he did. And I wonder if he's just saying to you, don't worry about trying to memorize, somatic memory. Try to remember all these things. Just understand that my teaching you is an episodic memory. This is significant. And because it's a significant memory, you may not even remember all the details of that. But you'll remember what I want you to remember at the time you need it. And I'll just say this and then we'll get off. And again, I'm just theorizing here. I think that may be one reason why the Gospels vary in their story about the life and ministry of Jesus. Because they all had different episodic memories with him. You get me? And I wonder sometimes if, and it's wonderful how the narratives do vary, I wonder sometimes that God had the gospel writers not remember everything exactly the same with the other gospel writers, but had each one of them remember something that was important for them to record, even though it may not be recorded somewhere else. And so anyway, that's just a thought. So keep that in mind. When you bring in a person through healing and they start to tell their trauma story, keep in mind that they're remembering certain things, and it's important for you to track that because you want to reinforce that with them in their healing process. Even by saying something to the degree of, you know what, this is probably going to be helpful for you someday in the future. So let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, let me go on. And we're going to talk about secondary or vicarious trauma. So that's at the bottom of page 22, and then go ahead and flip the page over. One of the phenomena, and some of you may be familiar with this, one of the phenomena that occur with a healer of trauma is this phenomena called secondary or vicarious trauma. And secondary or vicarious trauma is when the trauma healer experiences the same signs and symptoms as someone who has been traumatized without the traumatic event. Did that just make sense? You understand? So let me just say it again, just for emphasis. Vicarious or secondary trauma is when the trauma healer experiences the same symptoms and signs of trauma without experiencing the traumatic event. This is really an indicator that you're doing your job, by the way. Because we use the word vicarious. I think most of you know the word vicarious. You're good Christians and went to Bible school somewhere. We talk about the vicarious death of Christ. Yes? What do we mean? He took our place on the cross. He died for our sins. It's a vicarious death. You got that picture, right? Think of that as the trauma healer. You're serving a vicarious purpose. If healing's taking place, somehow in the trauma story, a certain degree of that pain and trauma is transferred to you. Did you just get that? Okay. You're having a vicarious function in their life. They're able to take this out of darkness. It's got to go somewhere, and it tends to go towards the healer as they take on, if you will, that trauma story. That's why and it's very common. If you're going to be a trauma healer, and I think you will be, you need to keep in mind there's a high likelihood I will experience the same signs and symptoms as someone who's been traumatized, even though I didn't go through a particular traumatic event. It's because God's using you to take the pain of that person, and to some degree, it goes to Jesus, obviously, but you're the mediator. It's being transferred somehow to some degree to you. And therefore you will have the same symptoms and signs. So I remember this happened to me. I'll give you my example. Now I go through the list of what things to look for because I found out something. And this was when I first started working in Uganda. This is my first year. And don't take what I'm about to say wrong. This is not an appeal for money or anything else. It's just my experience with secondary trauma. So I'm working with all these people that are traumatized and doing trainings, but working with a lot of traumatized people individually. And of course, as a missionary, you need funds to do ministry, right? And I was disappointed by the response both in finance and interest, of people that I knew back in America. Are you with me? Because, I've lived in America for my whole life, except the last 4 years. I know the affluence of this country. I'm not going to get preachy, but most Americans have no idea of the degree of comfort, affluence, and well-being they enjoy in life, even in the midst of a pandemic. It's unparalleled in most of the world. Certainly in the developing southern hemisphere of the world, like Africa. They have no idea. I mean, they have no point of reference to it. When people tell me here they're broke, that means they only have $10,000 in their savings account. Okay, you're broke, whatever. When a refugee tells me they're broke, they're broke. They have no source of income. Literally, and that's one of the things I'll spend the time we're providing for them, some way to be self-sustaining. But they don't. I don't even tell them that there's a thing called Starbucks, okay, that you can go and buy a drink from for about $5. The average pay in Uganda, not the refugees, but in Uganda, is $2 a day. And so, to tell them, using dollars, $5, it's just, you got it, right? But I get it. Everything's relative. We're Americans, right? We're not Ugandans. We're not South Sudanese in a refugee camp and all that. But I was still struggling with this. I'm thinking, get over it, people. You got enough money in your discretionary fund to do whatever. I mean, the numbers are unbelievable when I think about it. For $2.50, we can buy a reusable sanitary napkin and a pair of panties for a secondary girl at school for her period so she can stay in school. Now, what I just said there is just totally unfamiliar to Americans. There's not a 12, 13-year-old girl that I know in this country can't have a sanitary napkin so she can go to school. But there, you don't, which means you either got to go home and change your clothes, which means you miss class, or more often, you're out of school for a week every month. And you can't get an education when you're out of school for a month. And so these girls drop out all the time because they don't have $2.50. Are you getting me? This is what was exploding in me. If you know Anna, Pastor Willie's wife, you may or may not know her over at CityLink Water of Life. When the first trip she came, she was holding a baby, and the baby was sick with malaria. And she could tell her she was sick, and she goes, "What's going to happen, Glenn?" I go, "She's going to die." Because for $2.80, we can buy 3 days worth of tablets to save her life, but it was too late. And at that time, we weren't even targeting that. We are now. But you're getting what I'm saying? I'm not making people, I'm thinking, okay, people, Americans, for $2.80, you can save a kid under 5's life. This is like a no-brainer to me. But this is secondary trauma. You see what? Because one of the things that we'll look at the sign, one of the signs of trauma and secondary trauma is anger. And I was just livid. I was just so full of rage that, a country so affluent, so wealthy, compared to a country like Uganda, that people aren't even coughing up a few bucks in order to do certain things that really cost no money. And the Lord had to deal with me because I teach this stuff and I knew it. And I realized these stories I'm hearing were being transferred to me, and I was experiencing secondary trauma. The rage, the anger, I wanted to isolate. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I wanted to comfort myself in ways that you shouldn't comfort yourself. You get me? I was going through the same thing simply because, if I can put it this way, I was doing my job and their pain was being transferred to some degree with me, and I was having the symptoms that correlated with that. Okay, so just giving you an FYI, warning, if you're going to be a trauma healer and do your job, you probably will experience secondary trauma. So let's take a look at the symptoms and what to do about that, more importantly. So if you look at the signs of secondary trauma on the top of page 22, feeling angry or sad more often than usual. So that was me. I was so angry, and I was just so sad, depressed because of that. Sleep disorder, tired, fatigued, exhausted. I felt exhausted, but I wasn't not able to sleep. But there was fatigue because you're just worn out. Questioning God. Now that was a battle I had to go through spiritually. Because I believe in the church. I really do. And I believe the church has, that the people, God's people have good and generous hearts. Okay? I know that for a fact. I've seen it in my own life. And I couldn't connect how the people of God could be responding the way they are when I know they have good hearts. So I just began to question God. You know, I don't know if you've ever had a season where you question God. Okay, you know, you're like Job, and you know what's up with this, and it can be a tough pilgrimage because everything you believe suddenly is thrown into the question pot. Is any of this true? And what is true? And what is, you know, I feel like Pilate. What's truth? You know, at the end of the day. So that's part of one of the symptoms. Relationship problems, resentful. That's the one that really came up for me. Resentful, judgmental, because I was being judgmental towards other people, and unforgiving. Secret or habitual sin, that becomes very common. Impatient and resentful for the VIP. The healer now gets even angry at the VIP. Why aren't you growing more? Why aren't you pursuing your healing more? What's with that? You know, just some resentment towards the VIP themselves. Okay, hopelessness. Again, nothing's going to change. It's going to go on and on and on. A negative attitude. You know, those Americans. Typical. You know, that kind of thing. And then, of course, being burnt out, which I know most of you are familiar with. Okay, what to do, how to heal. Let's go through, first and foremost, my opinion, you need a friend in a safe place. Not necessarily a paid therapist, but you just need somebody in your life who, you understand, when I say a friend, you may not share the same common interests. You know, they may be into basketball, you may be into something else. I don't mean a friend that you share common interests with. I mean the kind of person that is in your life that you know is on your side no matter what. They are your friend. And when you go to them, and they're safe, you know you can share with them anything, the deepest, darkest secrets, and they will literally take it to the grave. They would never speak ill of you. They are your friend, and they're safe. And they don't give you advice. That's not that, you know, there's a friendship where there's an advice giver, but the kind of friend I'm talking about is not an advice giver. I don't know if you know who Brene Brown is, but she says it's the kind of person that will sit in the weeds with you. These weeds are entangling you, and you're trapped in them, and that friend just comes along, doesn't say a thing, just sits down next to you. And if you're going to be a healer, may I strongly urge you, you're going to have to find someone like that. And I do understand this is difficult in the church. I'm not saying refuge, just a real screwed refuge, okay? So, but in other churches, it's very difficult to have someone that you know is really safe, that is your friend. And if you do, you should praise and thank God and be a friend to them the same way they are a friend to you. I love what Jesus told his disciples. He goes, from henceforth, I call you friends. Remember he said that in John? Something had transpired in his relationship with them and them with him, whether they understood or not, that this was not a teaching relationship. This was not even a Savior relationship or a Lord relationship anymore. He said, you're my friends. I don't know if there are very few better words to hear from Jesus than him say to you, you're my friend. And so, please, find a friend who's safe. Okay, secondly, take care of yourself. You don't have to be narcissistic to take care of yourself. Self-love is not a sin. I don't know when being loving and encouraging and comforting to yourself somehow became sinful. But please take care of yourself, and there's ways to do that. For example, make sure you get proper sleep. We're going to talk about sleep. Sleep is important. So I hope you get good sleep. Nutrition, some of you know more about that than I do. But, eat right, eat well. You get it, right? These are common sense things. One of the great things about living in Uganda is everything, what we would call here organic. Everything is fresh. We just go right out in the marketplace. It's taken out that day from wherever, whatever. I mean, we've got a mango tree. We've got an avocado tree. We've got 5 papaya trees. We have maize that we grow in the yard. We've got raspberries and blueberries. I mean, I can go on, and it's not bought in a store somewhere, right? It's just go pick it literally off the tree. If we want to have chicken that night, you run down to the market, you get the chicken, you bring it home, you strangle it, depulk it, and cook your chicken. It's not processed, it's not frozen, it's not any of that. And so the food's, you get it, the food's great. That's one of the reasons why the theorizing COVID has been such a minimal impact on Uganda is because of the diet, because of what people eat. But regardless, as a healer, pay attention to what you eat. Don't be eating at In-N-Out every day. You can pray for me. It's so hard. I don't care how long that stinking line is. That part of my brain that requires episodic, remembers, that double cheeseburger, Glenn. It's okay. And of course I do it. It's you know how sin works. This temptation is so good. And then afterwards you feel like, I got it. I can't do this ever again. This is bad. Okay, so eat good. Let me go on. Exercise. You love that one, don't you? But yes, it's critical. I don't do it enough. I need to. I like the folks we're staying with 3 times a week. They go take their walk, down here at Day Creek somewhere. And so it's good. So please, and you don't have to join a gym or all that. I don't think. You know how to take care of yourself. Do some exercise. If you join a gym, that's great. Saying no firmly. Oh, this is good for you guys. So I'll preach at you for a moment. When I was at Water of Life, and people would take the spiritual gifts test, and as over Healing Caring, when I was looking for shepherd staff counselors, those that do ministry for people that are needing some sort of counseling, I looked for 2 gifts: wisdom and mercy. They could have pastoral gifts, teaching gifts. I didn't care. Give me a person who has wisdom, not knowledge, but wisdom, and the gift of mercy. Because I know they would care compassionately for people that are hurting and wounded. But I also knew that because they had the gift of mercy, no was not in their vocabulary. So I'm going to teach you a new word, because I'm assuming most of you have the gift of mercy. You want to learn a new word? Okay, it's spelled N-O. Can you pronounce with me on 3 that word I just spelled? 1, 2, 3. No. That's not good enough. We'll do it again and really mean it. Okay, 1, 2, 3. No! Okay, no is a complete sentence. The person you're talking to doesn't believe it's a complete sentence. You get me, right? They want to know, well, why no? You owe them no explanation whatsoever. You simply say, you can be nice or you can be like Glenn. You can say, well, no. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is I see it all the time in people who are trauma healers because they love people. And they want to say, God, heal, and they have a gift of mercy. But sometimes they have no sense of boundaries of simply saying no. It's that old illustration of when you fly, because you people fly, so you get this. In my part of the world, they never experienced this, so it has to be explained. If there's a problem with the plane, right? You know what the flight personnel say. The little oxygen mask is going to come down, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? And of course, you're good Christians, so The moment those come down, you're praying. Oh God, help me. But what do they tell you? Put it on don't put it on yourself. Put it on yourself first, and then on somebody else. Well, now, why do they say that to you? Because if you're dead, you're no good for your 5-year-old. So you got to take care of yourself first. Saying no, when it's said properly, is simply putting the oxygen mask on yourself first. Because you recognize, if I overload myself, I'm no good for anybody. I really can't help the people I need to help. Now, one of the advantages of being of a certain age is so much easier to say no. Because when I was younger, it was really important not to say no. Because when you said no, again, I'm going back to the church, people would make certain comments. Are you getting me? About you. And sometimes not always positive. But when you reach a certain age, trust me, when you get there, you'll understand, you really don't care anymore. You're exiting out anyway, what do I care? And so it makes it a lot easier to say no. But quite seriously, if you haven't learned to say no, say no. And we have to tell this to our healers all the time because they take on way too many VIPs, they're giving up way too much of their life, and they literally we suggest they say no more than 2 at any setting. And of course, they don't follow that often. But again, you got it. Learn to say no. That's really important. Let me go on. Take a break. It is okay to take time off from your ministry. God was able to function just fine before you for thousands of years. And he can probably handle 2 or 3 weeks of you just taking some time off. And so the whole world doesn't, set up on your shoulders. And so to take care of yourself means sometimes just to take a break. And just tell those who are over you, nicely, kindly, or whatever, I just need a little time off. I just need some R&R. I just need to take a break. And it should be okay. Because you'll come back better equipped and better refreshed and rested up. Get prayer. I'll ask it, but I don't want to see a show of hands. Sometimes for healers, they're the hardest people to pray for. They so often just simply don't ask for prayer. How are you? Great, fine. You liar. We need prayer. And again, the more I'm involved with this, the more I recognize I need prayer. When people say, we're praying for you, like some of you hopefully will pray for us, I'm holding you accountable. Because you know how we are as Christians. That's part of our language, right? A national tragedy happens, somebody died, and go, we're praying for so-and-so. But I take that seriously. I think God takes it seriously. So when someone says, we're going to be praying for you, my expectation is you're praying, otherwise don't tell me that. Okay? Just do it. And really thankful for that. I'm going to use Anna, my friend, as an example again, because I was visiting with her yesterday, and she had COVID, and was really sick, and was worried she might even die until her doctor says, don't, he's a Christian guy, says, you won't die. And she told me as I was leaving, you know what I felt most of all? I said, no. She says, I felt the prayers of the saints. And she, because this is like a thing you say, right? This is like a religious thing. But she stopped. She goes, no, Glenn, I felt their prayers. And I pause and I go, yeah, Anna, you're right. When the people of God pray for someone, you can feel it. You can literally feel it. So as a healer, I am going to suggest that you will need prayer. And you may find yourself coming up to the altar. So get over yourself. Come on up. You may find that you're a prayer, I don't know how it works here, but you're the ministry standing you up here. And suddenly you realize, wait a minute, I should be down there. and just go for it. It's okay. I don't think anyone's going to judge you. Even if they do, that's their problem, not yours. You need the prayer. Definitely need the prayer. Okay, let me move on. And scripture. I don't know what your habit is, and this isn't because I'm all saintly or whatever, but since I became a Christian, I learned very early on, you got to read this every single day. And pretty much that I do. And I don't read it. I read it for it to minister to me. I'm not trying to get information or prepare for a study or whatever else. I just know I need to hear from God. And I have a format that I do, but I also know that, there's a moment in which that word becomes living and active. And I need that. And I'm going to suggest if you're a healer, yes, you need the Word of God for training and for equipping. But in this case, this is part of taking care of yourself. This is for you. This is between you and God. And just let Him minister to you through the Word. It may be just a verse, and that's okay. It's just something that we all need if we're going to be in this ministry of healing. And then finally, take it to the cross. What I mean by that is at the end of the day, that's what I had to do. My secondary trauma, literally, I just had to take it to Jesus and say, you know what, nail this one to the cross. Take my judgmental, my negativity, my anger, and just take it and nail it to your cross and put it to death. Because I don't like this about me. I don't like being angry at the body of Christ. I don't like being judgmental towards them. Lord, I just don't like that. And so you just got to kill it in me. And so whatever it is for you as a healer that you might be experiencing, just please take it to the cross. Okay, now dangers of being a healer. Let me go through this. You may become the object of the VIP's anger. That's very common. The person you're actually trying to help gets angry at you because it's not happening the way they want to. And again, some of you understand this idea of transference and countertransference, and that's basically what we're talking about here. That if you're really doing your job well, and there's a perpetrator they haven't forgiven, don't be surprised if in that VIP's mind and emotions, you've become that perpetrator. And this phenomenon of transference just happens. They transfer all that anger and animosity onto you. Because someone emotionally and even spiritually, you have become representative of that. And of course, they don't understand this. I don't explain it to them. I'm just letting you know to be aware that that might happen. And let them go through what they need to go through to get healed from that and see you for who you are, not for what they think you are. Caring for too many people. Again, that's going back to saying no. I think you need to really limit yourself. And how many people, because as I mentioned before, and some of you said, yeah, oh yeah, that's true. I said, once you become recognized as a healer, you're gonna have a line. You think it now has a line? You're gonna have a line. Again, I'm gonna go back to my mentor, John Wimber. When he got saved, he went home and told his mother, because he used to play for the Righteous Brothers. I don't know if you know his story. I don't even know if you know who he is. But he comes home and he's saved. And he tells his mom, I'm saved. And she's not a believer. And he says, I'm going to become an evangelist. And she paused and she said, well, you'll never be out of work. So if you're a healer, you're never going to be out of work. Do you get me? It says always there's going to be someone that needs to be healed. So you have job security. But you've got to limit yourself of how much you're going to do. And then finally, be careful that you're not manipulated. Working in a refugee community, this is very common because they're so poor, they're so deprived. And so what we do with our VIPs that are in school, we provide certain things for them. They're under the school is free in the Ugandan system. However, because they're influenced by the British system, you have to wear a uniform. And so that costs money. And they're refugees. They don't have money to buy a uniform. You need scholastic materials, pens, papers, that kind of thing. You need to pay school fees, because there are school fees. So they don't have any money to do this. So what we do with our VIPs, if they're really in the process of healing, we take care of that for them. And the reason to do that, and we provide them a little backpack, for the stuff. And the reason why we do that is because we don't want them worried about, do I have school fees for the next term? We want them to concentrate on their healing, okay? Don't worry about your school fees. It's more important for you just to get healed and just be focused on that, not upon, and school fees are nothing. Let me trust it. A couple bucks for a term. But when you have nothing, it might as well be $1 million. So what has happened is that other kids find out about this. Word gets around. And so we always have kids coming up and saying, I'm traumatized. I need help. And what they're really saying is, I want a backpack. I want a uniform. I want my school fees paid. And so we have to say no. If you're traumatized, the teacher, who's a healer, will identify you, invite you for a conversation. And if you stay to 3 sessions, then we'll begin to take care of these kinds of needs. So just beware that people in the process of healing, you may experience, have a unique capacity to manipulate and exploit you in some way. So just be careful. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and talk about sleep now, if I can, because that's important. Are we okay? Okay. Because we're going to go to noon. We're going to break at noon for our lunch. And you have an hour for lunch. And we'll come back at 1 o'clock, and depending where we are, I may do a little more teaching, but then we're going to have another clinic with regards to sexual assault. And so that's kind of how we're mapping out the next couple hours. Okay, so let me talk about sleep disorders. So I'm going to kind of just go, you can read some of the introductory remarks, and then I'll go to the 4 stages of sleep. Sleep disorder is the number 1 symptom of trauma. It's not a sign, it's a symptom of the signs. And so, now it doesn't mean everybody has a sleep disorder is traumatized. But if someone has a sleep disorder, it's simply something you want to do a little bit more conversation. Now, let me do a little background here again, and we'll go through the notes. For years, sleep scientists didn't know why people slept. I'm going to say that again. For years, sleep scientists didn't know why people slept because they knew there was no medical organic reason why a person needs to sleep. You need to rest, including your eyes, but you don't need to sleep. That's the bottom line. It's the truth. And as we'll see, some people have learned that, and they sleep only a couple hours a night, for example. That wouldn't be me because I love sleeping. I have a very regular sleep pattern. I go to sleep almost every night at 10 and get up around 6:30, at the latest 7 every day. I take a nap every afternoon. When I worked at Water of Life, it was part of my agreement. I'm not joking you. I said I want an hour for lunch and I want an hour for my nap. And they were gracious enough, for whatever reasons, to give me my hour nap because I love it. I don't know if you've seen the movie about Winston Churchill during Darkest Hours. It's a great movie. And so there's a scene in that movie where he's meeting the king, King George. And the king says, well, Mr. Prime Minister, we're supposed to meet once a week. So how about Mondays at 4 o'clock? And Churchill goes, I can't do that. And he's talking to the king. And he goes, well, why not? And he goes, that's my nap time. I love that, It's the middle of a war, and he's got to have his nap time. Okay, fine. So I don't have sleep issues, thank God. But often people do. So scientists did a lot of research and now I'm going to get to it eventually. They know now why people sleep. And I'm going to try to explain that here in a few minutes because it's important when it's related to trauma. So go down. There's 4 stages, basically, to sleep. Remember the sleep disorders. There's 3 kinds of sleep disorders. There's insomnia. Insomnia is defined as the inability to fall asleep within the first 10 to 20 minutes of going to bed. So we have a TIBID, time in bed, and TIS, time in sleep. And so that transition from being awake to falling asleep should happen within 10 to 20 minutes. Beyond that, you have what's called insomnia. And we'll talk about what to do with some of these things in a minute. The second sleep disorder is called sleep disruption. And when I say this, I'm not talking about God waking you up in the middle of the night to pray. Okay? I'm talking a history or a habit or pattern in which the person falls asleep, but sometime during the middle of the night, and often the same time, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, their sleep is disrupted. And I don't mean because they're going to the bathroom or somebody came in the room. It's just they just kind of like wake up. and they're unable to fall back asleep within that 10 to 15 or 20-minute window. The third kind of sleep disorder is early rising, and that simply means that I get up, say, usually around 6:30. If I had an early rising problem, I would be getting up an hour or more earlier than I normally would. So I'd be getting up at 4:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so those are the three sleep disorders. There are 4 stages to sleep, and so let me run through that with you. It's there on your notes. And let me kind of explain this first before I go through the stages, because I see it on the notes there. There's 2 kinds of sleep, NREM and REM. And I think you know what REM is, right? That's rapid eye movement. We're going to talk about that. And NREM means non-rapid eye movement. When it comes to sleep, what has to happen is for you to go into a REM state. So let's go through the stages. The first stage of the cycle begins. This light sleep is non-REM, but it's characterized by this light sleep. The mind is transitioning from wakefulness to sleep, and it usually lasts about just 5 to 10 minutes. Now again, I fortunate, blessed, or for whatever reasons, I fall asleep within 10 minutes of hitting the pillows. The TV can be on, which you shouldn't have a TV in your bedroom. I'll get to that in a minute. The light could be on. People could be talking in the room. And if I'm in bed, I'm going to go to sleep within the first 10 minutes. But some of you, that's not you. The second stage is the falling asleep stage. Again, it's non-REM. That's when you become less aware of the surroundings. You know, it's like somebody walked into the room, and you go, I think somebody came in the room. You go, maybe somebody came in the room. Oh, I don't care. I'm going to sleep. Okay? You're moving from really consciousness to sleep conscious. The body temperature will drop. Breathing and heart rate slows down. And lasts about 20 minutes. Third stage is what we call deep sleep. That's non-REM too. The muscles become very relaxed. If you've had kids and they're in deep sleep, you've probably seen, in fact, maybe your husband or wife, I don't know, where they're flopping all over the bed. Have you seen that? Like I said, maybe your partner does that and it's smacking you in the face. And you go, and because that's deep sleep. The muscles are so relaxed, they're just going all over the place, and the person's entering that deep sleep stage. Next is blood pressure and breathing drop even further. Transition from falling asleep to deep sleep. It's the deepest sleep, and most of your sleep will occur during deep sleep. And so now the fourth stage. Now let me make an explanation here. Being a Westerner and teaching in a Western style, I've listed it as 1, 2, 3, now 4. But in reality, when you go to sleep, you may not go through consecutively stages 1, 2, 3, 4. Does that make sense? You could start on 1 and go straight to 3. I tend to do that. I start at stage 1 and I'm in deep sleep really quick, snoring and disrupting everybody else, which is deep sleep indicator. If somebody you know snores, it's because they're in deep sleep. Just try to wake them up and have them stop snoring. It's not going to happen. So you got it. It doesn't occur sequentially necessarily. Now, here's what's most important that I want you to get, and that is stage 4, whenever it might occur, which is REM sleep. It's what we call the dream state. You do dream, whether you remember it or not. We know this today, because again, people far smarter than me that sleep study and do MRIs and all that, and I'll explain why. Know that during REM sleep, the indicator you're in REM sleep is that you will dream. And so if you had REM sleep last night, you had a dream, whether you remember it or not. Now, just to comment briefly, I'm not going to get into extensively about dreams. That's a whole other aspect in itself. Dreams. And then as Christians, you may have a different sort of, not belief, but, opinion. So dreams could be because just, as we'll see in a moment, the brain is very active during REM sleep, and it's just the firing of neurotransmitters. You know what I mean? It's nonsensical. It's just a result of all this firing in your brain, and maybe you've had that kind of dream, and it's like, wow, what was that? That was kind of weird, and probably because it doesn't make any sense. Secondly, dreams could be the result of repressed feelings and experiences that are now resurfacing. Because as you'll see in a moment, this is when the brain is most active. And because the brain is most active, things that were repressed during your waking hours may come to your awareness in your brain that is really going crazy in terms of it being recharged, so to speak. The third possibility, again, is God will give you a dream. And he'll give it to you in REM sleep, because that's the dream state, because this is when you're most alert. This is literally when your brain is most active. So the reason why people sleep is because the brain needs to be recharged. And it happens during REM sleep. We know today that in REM sleep is when the brain is most active. When you look at the machines recording the transfer, the brain is just exploding like it does no other time during the day or night. And it's like taking your cell phone and plugging it and recharging it at night. If you don't recharge it at night, what happens? It's dead. It's worthless until it gets recharged. That's REM sleep. The brain needs a period of time to be recharged. It should be about 20% to about 2 hours of the sleep cycle should be REM sleep for the brain to get recharged. Without it, I don't know, I haven't noticed, there can be severe consequences if the brain's not getting recharged because of REM sleep. The way you can know you haven't gotten REM sleep is when you get up the next morning, even though you may have slept for 6, 7, 8 hours, is you feel like you haven't gotten one moment of sleep. If you ever felt that way, you may be groggy, unable to concentrate, feeling like you need to go back to sleep. Now, keep in mind, because sleep occurs somewhere in a 24-hour cycle, you can't make up for lost REM sleep. So if I didn't get REM sleep last night, I can't make up for it by taking a nap today. It occurs in that 24-hour, 4-stage life sleep cycle. You can't sleep extra hours tomorrow night because you didn't get REM sleep the night before. Are you with me? It's that 24-hour, 4-stage life sleep cycle that it has to occur. Now, quite honestly, some people have learned to understand this, and they've learned just to get REM sleep. Steve Jobs was known for this because he thought it was a waste of time to sleep 8 hours when all you needed was that window of about 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. And so he would sleep about 2 or 3 hours every night. Another person that we all know is President Trump. That's why he's tweeting at 3 o'clock in the morning, by the way. He sleeps REM sleep. Because again, like Jobs, he believes that it's a waste of time. And maybe you think that too. I already said my opinion. No, I don't. I love it. I'm not going to go into REM sleep just because, I think the other 6 hours is a waste of time. Not to me. I like it. Thank you very much. Nobody bothers you. You're asleep. So it's great. It's like a vacation. So at any rate, and again, people have learned to do this. Okay, they've learned to skip stage 1, stage 2, and go straight into REM sleep. Another thing about sleep that's important to understand so what happens if you don't get REM sleep and you're traumatized, your brain's a mess because it's not been recharged enough. And often because people are traumatized, they can't sleep. Why can't they sleep? You already know. They keep reliving and re-experiencing the traumatic event. It's intrusive thoughts. It's keeping them awake. They can't sleep. So when you work with people who are traumatized, you really want to help them with their sleep. You really want to pray with them that they would get REM sleep. Because without REM sleep, after 5 days, you go into a psychotic state. You literally will go crazy. And so you don't want to go crazy. That's not good. It's really important to help them with that. And so some things you can help them with. How do you do that? I'm going ahead in your notes, but that's okay. We'll follow it up later. One, you got to take a look at the sleep environment. So if you have a problem with sleep, whether you have insomnia, sleep disruption, or early rising, what was helpful, first of all, is to get out of the bed and go somewhere else. If you can't fall asleep within 20 minutes, or you wake up and you can't go back to sleep, are you with me? Don't stay in the bed. Because the basic theory, if I can put it that way, is that the bed is for sleep and sleep is for the bed. The brain builds correlations between certain events and other things. And the brain needs to be trained, if there's a sleep disorder, that the bed is for sleep and sleep is for the bed. So that if you can't fall asleep, you want to get out of the bed. You with me? Before that 20 minutes is up. Don't lay there trying to fall asleep, whether it's sleep disruption or early rising. Get out of the bed, go somewhere else in the house, sit down, and please don't take this wrong, but I suggest do one or two things in order to get sleepy and fall back asleep, start to fall back asleep so that you can go back into the bed. One, read your Bible. More importantly, two, pray. And I think most of us who are honest would say, oh yeah, I'll start to fall asleep when I start to pray and read the Bible at 2 o'clock in the morning. You with me? And when you start to feel that you're falling asleep, you go back to bed and make that connection. The bed is for sleep and sleep is for the bed. Okay, now I'm going to speak to an American problem, because it's an American problem with sleep. And people pay a lot of money for this, by the way. You're getting it for free. Most Americans, I should ask it just to see. How many of you have a TV in your bedroom? How many of you have a problem sleeping? Get rid of the TV. Because the brain, when you go, and I know some of you think, the TV helps me fall asleep. Yes, but it doesn't give you REM sleep. It's too much noise going on. So if you go into the bed and you're watching TV, the brain is thinking, I'll put it this way, are we going to sleep or are we watching TV? You're in bed, we're supposed to be going to sleep, but you're watching the TV. Which one are we doing? You get me? If you have a laptop and you go to bed to answer your emails and your Facebook or whatever, the brain's going to be confused. It's going to say, are we working or are we going to sleep? You getting me? The number one culprit? You're going to hate what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it. This should not be in your bedroom. We got an amen over here. This side was kind of quiet. Go, okay. Kind of like it, but I think you've gone too far with that one. Why? Well, one, you know how this thing works unless you got it turned off. Every notification, every time somebody goes to your Facebook account, someone gives you a message or whatever, it does what? Ding, 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 whatever. It's bad. If you have a sleep disorder, if you don't have a sleep disorder, fine. I mean, I have it. Oh, no, I don't have, even where we're at right now, I don't have it in the bedroom. But sometimes at home I have it in the bedroom, but I don't care if it's going off or not. But if you have a sleep problem, you understand what I mean? You gotta take care of yourself, and you gotta have your REM sleep. And I would just really urge you to consider removing it so that you can get the kind of sleep. Make sure you have a proper sleep environment. Make sure the curtains are drawn, that it's dark, that kind of thing, and to help you fall asleep. Let me see. I'm looking here. What else I want? Be aware of factors that might, over on page 25, that might influence your sleep. Certainly drinking a cup of coffee 10 minutes before you go to bed is probably not a good idea. Drinking alcohol to put you to sleep is not a good idea. Again, there are things that can make you sleepy, if you're with me. But what you're looking at is what? REM sleep. And to get REM sleep, it doesn't help to have these outside influences because it interferes with REM sleep. And why do you need REM sleep, especially people who are traumatized? Because as we're going to see here in a few moments, the brain needs to be fully recharged in order to process the traumatic memories and to be healed. I'll mention it now because we're talking about sleep, because I may forget later on. One of the healing methods, now this is not what I'm about to describe is not evidence-based, but it seems, especially for combat guys, it seems to be very helpful in dealing with the trauma, and that's called lucid dreams. Are you familiar with what a lucid dream is? And I would really encourage you. You've all probably experienced it. That's having a dream and you know you're dreaming. And we know today that with lucid dreams, you can manipulate and control the dream. Are you with me? So, for example, the way it works with trauma, if someone's traumatized, you can encourage them to begin to have a lucid dream about the trauma event and to create a different scenario of the outcome that will re-script in the dream the traumatic event, which can be healing for the person. Okay, you got the idea. Okay, and that's lucid dream. Now, people that are traumatized will have traumatic nightmares. That's very common of the event. And so, again, we talked about that. That would be a symptom of trauma. How to help heal, I think I pretty much help explain that. The environment, get rid of all that stuff. And let me see, because I'm wanting to make sure. On page 25, I think you already know this. There's people that are morning people and people that are evening people. They tend to marry each other, by the way. Just a whole nother subject. It's just the way that they've learned to sleep from pretty much when they were kids. And so you just have to learn to adapt to that. Okay, take a breath. I'm going to go ahead in the next 20 minutes, and we'll see how far we get, to talk about the traumatized brain. So go to page 27. And to understand how the brain is traumatized, let me read through some aspects, and this can get a little complicated. I apologize, but it's intended to give you the knowledge and information, and we may break when I'm done with this. But trauma, you see, understand, trauma is not an experience. The traumatic event is an experience. But trauma is a response to the traumatic event. You get the distinction? Okay. So trauma is an emotional response to the traumatic event that has happened to the person. Thirdly, psychological trauma is a strong, persistent, negative emotional response to a past life-threatening event or reminder of the event. What I'm trying to communicate there is two things. The trauma that the person experiences psychologically is powerful and persistent. It's not occasional. It's not episodic. It doesn't stop, apart from healing. And secondly, it's a negative emotional response to the traumatic event. So the person isn't, at this point without healing, drawing a positive life experience from the traumatic experience. It's all negative. Again, I'm going back to the current pandemic as a possible illustration of this. For many people, there's nothing positive about the pandemic. It's all negative. And for many people, especially the traumatized, it's persistent. It doesn't seem it's going away. Okay, next. Trauma is a learned response via repetition, and I mean by trauma is how they cope with it, via repetition and exaggeration of the emotional stimuli. Okay, too much language maybe. The emotional stimuli is the trigger that's setting off the memory of the trauma. You got that? It could be a smell, it could be a place, it could be a taste, it could be a path down to the water. And so the person, to cope with that trauma, learns a particular response. that becomes repetitive. They do again and again and exaggerated. Common coping mechanism, for example, alcohol. So the person who's been traumatized, somehow that traumatic event is triggered. That's the emotional stimuli. In order to cope with that, a person may choose to drink alcohol. And they will do it repeatedly, and they will exaggerate, or they will expand their drinking behavior, all as a way of coping with the traumatic memory. Does that make sense? Okay. And what are the coping mechanisms you could put in? The important thing is it has two elements. It's repetitive and it's exaggerated. I mean, it's over the top. All men are rapists. Again. Okay, and she kept telling herself that. Okay, next. A trauma is a learned, compressed sequence of events replayed emotionally, instantly. Okay, I'm going to try to explain this. So when you look at the trauma, that's a learned response. What is going on for the person, this is why really Jesus needs to heal, is that trauma coping mechanism, whatever it is, it becomes very compressed. And there's a sequence that the person enters into in order to cope with it. What I mean by sequence is they go through certain steps. So they don't first drink, for example. But there's a lead up to the drinking behavior. Are you with me? A sequence of steps or events. That's really compressed and happens almost instantaneously. So it's not long and drawn out. So what they remember of the traumatic event and their coping mechanisms is not this expanded long story, but it's all really compressed or condensed. And then whatever the behavior is, almost is engaged instantly in order to survive or cope that memory. I hope I didn't lose you. Are we okay? No, we're not okay. Let me kind of went through this, and then we'll go back, and don't lose your question, because we'll have time. Okay. Trauma can range from minor to major. I think you get that. Okay. I don't think I need to explain that. It can go from contextualized to expanded. So the gal, again, with the trauma of the water, she took it from the context of getting water and expanded out to all men. And so again, that's very common. Trauma is an association between a sensory event. The reason why we use that language is this is very technical language because it's part of the training. Trauma, the traumatic event, impacts all the senses: taste, smell, hearing, sight. All of it, because that's what it's affecting. We'll talk about the survival brain in a minute. That's why people in the military go through so much training, because when we're in a combat situation, they're being traumatized. You want to mitigate the effects on all the senses. And training will do that, where the person simply reverts back to their training in order to deal with that traumatic situation. Okay, so there's an association with all of these events, example, combat weight, and metadata. Metadata simply means the actual events. It's a technical word. It's the actual sequence of event. The soldier getting out of his armored vehicle. The soldier raising his AK-47. The soldier firing it at the young boy. Okay, that's the metadata. It's the specifics of the traumatic event in which they try to make some sort of meaning of mentally and emotionally. And that goes into the trauma story. So that's sort of an attempt to explain the more clinical understanding of what trauma is. So we got time, so I want to take some questions to try to clarify, because I understand, but that's part of the training here, is to give you that sort of information. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. Yeah, sequence of events, okay. So the person has a traumatic experience, and they've learned to cope with that by doing something. What will happen is, whatever that coping mechanism is, when that trauma the emotion is triggered, that response it's not like it's thought out. is compressed. Okay, I don't know. That's the language that's used. I'm fishing for another word than compressed. It's just reduced to the bare essentials. That's why it's so difficult often to break the coping mechanisms, because it seems almost innate that the person is doing. Does that make sense? Or unconscious, because of this compression of how the person is coping with it, especially the more they continue to be unhealed. And again, I don't mean this religiously, but that's why you need the power of Jesus to break that. Because and it's tied, as we'll see here this afternoon, certainly, to survivability. So does that help you? Does that make sense? So I'm trying to think of, so like if the person is drinking, I'm just going to use alcohol as the example. Unlike the alcoholic, that usually has sort of a ritual. That's the word we use. They go through, especially if they're trying to deal with it. So the alcoholic, he's not traumatized. He's an alcoholic. And so he'll go by the liquor store, for example. I could use eating disorder. Is that better? So you drive by the Krispy Kreme. Oh, look, they like that one. And you got a problem with eating, right? Okay, can we say that? Is that okay? Okay. And not everybody has a problem, but and so, but you drive around the block because you're battling with this thing. You got me? And so you drive around again, and now you kind of get in line. I don't know. And they go, I'm not going to get out of line. But then you come back and you get in line. And then you order your favorite dozen donuts or whatever it is and eat 2 or 3 of them and throw the rest of them away. So that's typical addictive behavior, if I can use that, of any kind: sex, drugs, rock and roll. No. Food. That a person goes through these rituals, we know. With someone who's traumatized, that's all been compressed. If Krispy Kreme is a coping mechanism, they're not getting out of line. They're going straight to the counter and getting the donuts, and they're going to indulge in all of them, okay, because it's been triggered. And the only way to get the triggering out of your mind is to do or to take whatever works for you, and that is compressed so tightly that it seems instantaneous. It's almost like the person isn't even thinking about it. Okay, thank you. Did you have a follow-up to that? Yes. Yes. Exactly. Because if I get this, you may not think this consciously, but you think, if I get this Krispy Kreme, I'm going to be okay. And of course, you know how it works afterwards. You feel horrible and guilty and all, because you have that same kind. But that won't stop you. See, so unlike, we use Krispy Kreme as an example, unlike the person who has an an addiction, they can be treated and healed with, learning to break that ritual and that kind of thing. But for the person who is traumatized, that's really difficult to do, because it's tied to survivability. We'll talk about that when we talk about the survival brain. Whatever coping mechanism a person has used, well, I'll just allude to it right now. They've learned that because when they survived the traumatic event, that's how they survived it. So take our little boy, Daniel, who has some sort of story. And when he went through his traumatic event, as we'll learn here in a few moments, the survival brain, that's, if you put your hand right here, you should feel a little bump. You with me? If you don't feel it, you really need help. Okay, that's your survival brain. Okay, I'm not an evolutionist. If I was, that's the most primitive part. It's what's called the reptilian brain. I'm not an evolutionist, and I'll explain all that in the next session. That part of your brain is the most important part of your brain, because it's responsible for keeping you alive. Right now, you don't have to think about your heart beating. If you did, if you're like me, several of us would be dead if I had to tell my heart, oh, beat. You get me? Okay, so God's smart. He gave you a little part of the brain that does it for you. Good news. Bad news is, and I'll go more into a minute, but or after our break, when trauma occurs, because the number one agenda of the brain is to keep you alive. Not to feel in love, not to get an A in class, Because if you're dead, you can't do any of that. So during the traumatic event where your life is threatened, the survival brain will hijack the rest of the brain. Like that, immediately takes it over. And it will send a message to the emotional and thinking brain to do one of four things. Cry for help, number one. Help me, right? And just like that, help. No help comes, you have three other options that the survival brain will determine you need to do based upon whatever the situation is. One is to freeze. That's why when women are raped, they often freeze. Because maybe the person will think you're dead and leave you alone. The second is to flee. Let's get out of here. Run as fast as you can. You got it? The third is to fight. That little boy, Daniel, whatever happened to him in South Sudan, and probably by an authority figure because that's what his teacher was, and that's what triggered it, survived that traumatic event. I don't even know what it is, by fighting. You get me? And every time that was re-experienced, like with his teacher, what did he do? He reverted to the coping mechanism that enabled him to survive the original traumatic event. You get me? That's what will happen. The person, whatever enabled him to survive, help me, freezing, fleeing, or fighting, they will revert back to that in some form in order, in their mind, to survive this current memory being triggered. Now keep in mind, and I'm going to stop here probably because I have 4 minutes, there is no traumatic event. That person who is being triggered by an emotional stimuli that is similar to a traumatic event, whatever that is, are you with me so far? Is not life-threatening. You got that? The survival brain doesn't know that because it feels the same. And unless healing and some wisdom takes place, because this is just the way God made us, that survival brain will overtake or hijack the rest of the brain again. And so the person is going to fight, if that's what they're going to argue, they're going to be violent, they're going to be aggressive, they're going to flee, they're going to run. The woman who's been raped and she's married to a man who loves her, he touches her a certain way, she's going to run. Or she's going to freeze. Are you with me? Because that's how she survived. Now, he may not understand any of this and take it personally, those other things. So you got it. They will find some way that fits how they originally survived, because the survival brain is telling them, we're going to die. And the only way you're going to live is if you do what you did before, because that's how you survived. You got it. Okay, we're going to take our break. That's what needs to be healed. The way that brain functions is what Jesus needs to heal. And then being helped, walked with, of what to do instead of allowing the survival brain to the word we use technically is hijack, or to take over the rest of the brain. So, as I close, we're in the midst of a pandemic. And if people's survival brains are being triggered, they're going to find a way to survive this. Unless they get healed. Okay? Let me pray for you and send you off to have your lunch. Hope you enjoy it. And we'll pick up when we come back, okay? Let me pray. Father, I thank you for our time together this morning. I ask that it's helpful and beneficial to each, and that you, by your Spirit, would make application to every person that is meaningful for them. And so, Father, bless their lunches. We thank you for the provision of your food. We bless you for your grace, that you would care for us so much, that you would make sure that our sustenance is provided for. And so we thank you and bless you for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thank you.